Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Voice of War by Zack Argyle. This is the first book in the Threadlight trilogy. It's a high fantasy and epic fantasy, a little bit of military fantasy mixed in with it as well. And this is also a self-published novel. A lot of people have really enjoyed this book and this series, and so I wanted to give my review of it now that I've actually read it again. I read it first in 2022, I think, and then I never continued on with the series at the time, but I finally decided to reread Voice of War so that I could finish out the series, finish out the trilogy. So, let's see here. Voice of War is the first book in the Threadlight trilogy by Zack Argyle. I just mentioned that. This is a self-published epic fantasy series, and one that I've both heard a lot about on BookTube and wanted to read. It's one that I've wanted to read for a while. Even though I have already read the first book, I wanted to read the entire series for a while, basically since I started hearing about it. I've also previously read Voice of War, I mentioned that as well, but decided to reread it so I could continue on with the series, and that's kind of what I mentioned. I just figure I'd read what I actually had written, because sometimes that's clearer. So there was a lot in this book that I really did enjoy, and I do believe I enjoyed it more on this reread than I did the first time I went through it. Obviously, one of the things that this book is known for is its magic system, and how it in many ways seems to almost be like a less complex version of a Sanderson magic system. There's some very specific set rules for the magic. There are only certain things it can do, as well as it being very limited in its uses. The biggest draw to it for me is actually just the aesthetic side of things. Actually, it's not even the magic itself, but I love light and I love color-based magic systems, and so when you have a light or a color-based magic system, I tend to really love it. And this magic system here is Threadlight. Obviously the series is called the Threadlight trilogy. Light is literally in its name, and it also manifests in a few different colors, and so automatically I'm drawn to it because of that. But it's more than that. As much as I like the aesthetic side of it, it's the way that it ties into the story that I like the most. That's what you should be able to do with any magic system. It should be tied into the story in order. Everything should be focused around telling the story. And I feel like Zack Argyle was able to do that really well with his magic system as a way to help tell the story, rather than just be, okay, we're going to look at this really cool magic system, or we're going to have a story and that just happens to have magic in it. This one very much was, the magic system is part of the story that's going on. For starters, though, the plot basically revolves around what happens to a single family after their son is born being able to use a different type of threadlight than is possible. That begins a bit of a domino effect throughout the story that is used to both expand the world, and as well as it causes issues for the family and the nation that they serve. And that's what I mean by this magic system being tied so directly into the story of the series and of the book, is that without this magic system, a lot of the events of the series could not happen. And that's not to say that the magic system is used as a crutch here. It's actually used as a way to tell a story that would have been very difficult to tell otherwise. The thing about this book that most people really latch onto, though, is the familial representation and how a father will do anything to protect his son. That is really what is at the heart of this story, and is actually what is driving the plot forward here. This is actually my favorite type of storytelling, and I've talked about it several times recently, but this idea of the plot happens because of the actions of the characters, not because the plot needs to happen. And I love that. I love when it's a plot-driven story, but it's also a character-driven story, because the two are so intricately tied together that without one you can't have the other. Before I finish up this review, though, I'd just quickly like to say, if you're liking what you're seeing from an Erudite adventure, we'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and subscribe. So there's more to this story than just that, though, and those other aspects to the story are what is really setting up this series as an epic fantasy series. More than the very personal story of Chris and his family, quite honestly, those aspects were not as interesting to me upon this reread, and it really was Chris's story that kept my interest this time going through it. But you can definitely see how those other parts of the story, point of views, I'll say, these other POVs of the story that were included in this first book, you can see how they're there to build out this world, build out this story, and create this epic fantasy trilogy that Zack Argyle was trying to create. Overall, I thought this was a really solid first book in the series, and one that sets up for potentially a brilliant series and a character study going forward. I do think that I enjoyed it more on the reread than I did the first time through, and that's a great thing when you can start seeing how things are going together, start seeing the reason why the characters are making decisions that they are, and also just to mature as a reader a little bit to the point where, I mean, yeah, it's a year apart, it's not like it's a ton of time that I spent in between these two books, or in between the first read and the reread, but I've grown as a reader. I've experienced more stories, more types of stories, and all that plays into coming back to the story now and reading it and enjoying it more. Editing T here, just figured I'd mention this because I realized that I'd messed up after I actually filmed the video, and that is, I have already done a review for Voice of War. That being said, the things that I talk about in that first review of Voice of War when I first read it are different than the things that I talk about in this new review. And so I recommend going and watching that old one. I'll have it linked up in whatever corner it is for ease of access, and probably in the description down below. But I do want to clarify that because I did review it at one point, and this is a second review now because I've read it again. And they're different reviews. They talk about different things. Both have different sides of my thoughts and opinions on the book, and both still have current thoughts on this book. So I want to mention that, and if you want to hear more of my thoughts about the book, go watch that first review. So anyways, that is my review for Voice of War by Zack Argyle. Thank you guys for watching, and Erudite Adventure. We're posting videos every Monday and Thursday, and we'll see you guys again soon. Stay warm.